Evening dreamers, lower the mask and rest easy. No one needs saving tonight. Tonight, we drift back through the whole story of the very first of them all, the one who came before every other hero, the last child of a dead world raised on a quiet farm, who grew up to become the most powerful being on earth, and who chose, out of everything he could have been, simply to be kind. Nothing tonight will ask anything of you. You don't need to remember any of it. You don't need to follow every turn. You can let every word drift past you like the glow of a single lit window seen from far away across a sleeping city, like snow falling slow and silent over quiet rooftops. And that is exactly how this is meant to be heard. Slowly, gently, with no particular place to be. Tonight, we are going to drift through the entire story of the man who started it all. Because before there were any of the others, before the dark night in his city of shadows, before the whole vast crowd of caped and masked figures that would follow, there was one, the first, the one who invented the very idea of what a hero in a cape could be. And his story is not really a story about power, though he has more of it than almost anyone. It is a story about goodness, about what a person does with power once they have it, about a child who lost an entire world and found a new one and grew up to protect it, not because he had to, but because he chose to, again and again, every single day. It is one of the gentlest and most hopeful stories ever told, and it is the perfect thing to drift through on a quiet night, because underneath all the flying and the great feats of strength, it is really about the quiet, steady, unglamorous choice to be good. And there are few things more soothing to rest on as you drift toward sleep than that. But there is no need to hurry toward any of it. We have all night and the whole long story to tell, and it is meant to carry you down into sleep, not to keep you here with me. So before we begin, get comfortable. Turn the lights down low or off completely. Rest your head against something soft. And if you feel like it, before you drift too far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's a gentle thing we like to imagine, all the quiet rooms this voice travels into. A city apartment high above the glowing streets. A small house at the end of a long, dark road. A bed by a window somewhere, with the rain coming down, or the snow, or the warm, still air of somewhere far away. Wherever you are, you're welcome here. And if these quiet stories help you find your way down into sleep, you're always welcome to follow along, so the light's still on tomorrow night and the night after that. There's no rush at all. We have all the time in the world. Let's begin. Let's begin at the very beginning, softly, with a small, true thing about him that is easy to forget, because it explains why his story matters so much. He was the first, the very first. Before him, the idea of a costumed hero with fantastic powers, flying through the sky, saving the innocent, wrapped in a bright cape and a bold emblem, simply did not exist, not in the form we know now. He was dreamed up in the middle of the 1930s by two young men, the sons of immigrants, and he first appeared in print in the spring of 1938. And when he did, he changed everything. Because he was so new, so strange, so exciting, that the whole world of storytelling rushed to copy him. Every caped hero who came after, every masked figure, every person who ever pulled on a costume to fight for the good, all of them trace back, in the end, to him. He is the source, the first spring from which the whole river flows. And that is worth resting on, softly, because it means that when we drift through his story tonight, we are drifting through the story that gave birth to all the others. And his story begins, softly, not on Earth at all, but far away, on another world, a world that was dying. Picture it gently as we sink into the tale. Somewhere out among the distant stars, there was a planet, an old world, a proud world, a world of great cities and great knowledge, of a people far more advanced than we are, who had mastered sciences we can barely dream of. It was a beautiful world in its way, gleaming and ancient, orbiting a distant red sun. But it was dying. Deep in the heart of that world, something had gone wrong. Some slow catastrophe building in its core, and the whole planet was doomed, though almost no one on it would believe it. And here, softly, is where the sadness that sits at the root of his whole story begins. Because there was one man, a great scientist on that dying world, who could see what was coming. He looked at the evidence and he understood, with terrible certainty, that his entire planet was going to be destroyed, and soon. And he tried to warn them. He stood before the leaders of his world, the councils and the powerful, and he told them the truth, that they had to act, that they had to leave, that the end was coming. But they would not listen. They could not believe that their great and ancient world, which had stood for so long, could simply end. They dismissed him. They mocked him, perhaps. They went on with their lives, certain that tomorrow would be like every other day. And the scientist, unable to save his world, unable to convince anyone, turned to the only thing he could still save: his child. There is something in that image, softly, worth resting on gently, that reaches into some of the oldest and deepest fears and hopes there are. A parent who cannot save the world, and so pours everything into saving their child. A doomed people who will not heed the warning. A single small vessel prepared in desperate haste to carry one precious life away from a catastrophe that will consume everything else. It is a story that echoes some of the oldest stories humanity has ever told. Tales of great floods and doomed cities, of a single child set adrift to escape a destruction that claims all the rest. And it sits right at the root of him, this first and greatest loss. Before he was a hero, before he was powerful, before he was anything, he was a baby placed in a small ship by parents who loved him and knew they would never see him grow, and sent away, alone, into the dark, so that he might live when everything else would die. Let's drift now with that small ship, softly, as it falls away from the dying world and out into the vast dark between the stars. Because the planet did die, exactly as the scientist had foreseen. In one terrible moment, the whole ancient world tore itself apart, and everything on it, all its cities and its knowledge and its people, was gone. An entire civilization ended in an instant, and out of all of it, all those millions of lives, all that history, only one thing survived. A single small ship, carrying a single sleeping child, falling through space toward a distant yellow star, and the small blue world that circled it. Think about the scale of that loss, softly, and how it shapes everything that follows. He is, from the very first moment of his life, the last of his kind. The sole survivor of an entire world. Everyone he might have known, every relative, every friend he might have made, the whole culture and history and language of his people, all of it gone before he was old enough to know it existed. He carries, though he will not understand it for years, the weight of being the last. The final ember of a fire that has gone out. The one who lived when all the rest were lost. And that quiet grief, that sense of being the last of something, of belonging to a place that no longer exists, sits underneath his whole story, no matter how bright and hopeful it becomes. He is, forever, an orphan of a vanished world. But the ship flew on, softly, through the long dark, carrying its sleeping cargo across a distance so vast it is hard to even imagine. And at last, after who knows how long, it reached the small blue world. It fell through the sky, a streak of fire, and came down at last in a quiet stretch of countryside, in the gentle farmland at the heart of a great nation, on the small blue world we call our own. And there, in a field, under the wide open sky, the little ship came to rest. And this, softly, is where the second great movement of his story begins, because the loss of one world becomes the finding of another. And the child who lost everything is about to be found by exactly the people he needs. Because a couple live nearby softly, a farmer and his wife, good, simple, hard-working people, getting on in years, kind-hearted and honest, living a quiet life on their land. And by most tellings, they were people who carried a quiet sorrow of their own. They had always wanted a child and had never been able to have one. And so here were two people with a great deal of love to give and no one to give it to. And there, falling from the sky into their quiet lives, was a child with no one to love him and a desperate need to be loved. It is one of those meetings that feels almost like fate. Softly, the lonely child and the childless couple, each the answer to the other's deepest need, brought together by a rocket falling out of the sky into a quiet field. They found the ship, softly, and they found the child inside it, and their lives changed forever in that moment. Because they did not hesitate. They did not turn away from the strangeness of it, the impossible ship, the child from the stars. They saw a baby who needed a home, and they had a home, and a heart full of love, and so they simply took him in. They took him into their house, and into their family, and into their hearts, and they raised him as their own son. They gave him a name, a plain and ordinary name, the kind of name a farm child in that country would have. And they raised him, from that day on, not as a strange visitor from another world, but simply as their boy, their child, the son they had always wanted and never thought they would have. Let's rest a moment on the quiet beauty of that, softly, because it is one of the most important things in the whole story, and it is easy to rush past. The most powerful being who would ever walk the earth was raised by two humble farmers in a quiet country place. Not by kings, not by scientists, not by the powerful or the wise, but by two simple, decent, loving people who worked the land with their hands and asked for nothing more than a good life and someone to share it with. And that, as we will see, made all the difference. Because who he became, the goodness at the center of him, the values that would define him, did not come from his powers and did not come from his dead world. They came from that farmhouse, from those two ordinary people, from the love and the decency and the quiet, steady example of a farmer and his wife who took in a child from the stars and taught him, simply, how to be good. Let's drift, now, into that upbringing, softly, into the long, quiet years on the farm, because they are the true heart of who he is, and they are gentle and warm to rest on. Imagine it, a boy growing up in the golden countryside, in a world of wide fields and open skies, of long summer days and the slow rhythms of farm life. Rising early to do his chores, working the land alongside the man he called his father. Learning, from two people who loved him, the simple, deep lessons that would shape his whole life. Honesty, hard work, kindness, the idea that you help your neighbors, that you tell the truth, that you do the right thing even when no one is watching, even when it is hard, even when it costs you something. These were not grand philosophical lessons. They were the plain, humble, everyday values of good country people, taught not through lectures, but through example, through the daily witnessing of two decent people living decent lives. And the boy absorbed them completely until they became the very core of who he was. And then, softly, as he grew, something began to happen. He began to discover that he was different. Not just different in the way every child feels different, but truly, strangely different. Because as he grew, under the light of that warm yellow sun, so different from the distant red sun of his birth, his body began to do impossible things. He found that he was stronger than other children, far stronger, strong enough to lift things no boy his age could possibly lift. He found that he was faster, that he could not be hurt the way others could be, that the scrapes and bruises of childhood simply did not touch him. And as the years went on, the abilities only grew. Strength beyond any human measure, speed beyond belief, skin that nothing could pierce, senses that reached far beyond the ordinary, and eventually, most wondrous of all, the ability to leave the ground entirely, to rise up into the air, to fly. Imagine what that must have been like, softly, for a boy growing up, to slowly discover that you are not like anyone else, that you can do things no one else can do, that there is something strange and powerful inside you, growing stronger every year, setting you apart from everyone you know. It could have been frightening. It could have been isolating. It could have made a boy feel like a freak, an outsider, something to be feared. And in the hands of the wrong family, raised without love, without guidance, without those steady, humble values, it could have gone very differently. A child with that kind of power, raised without love, might have become something terrible, might have learned that his power made him better than others, that he could take what he wanted, that the ordinary rules did not apply to him. But that is not what happened, softly, and the reason is those two people on the farm. Because his parents, seeing his powers grow, did not teach him that they made him special or superior or entitled. They taught him the opposite. They taught him that his gifts were exactly that, gifts, and that gifts come with responsibility. They taught him that the strong have a duty to protect the weak, not to rule them, that power is not for taking, but for helping, that the greater your ability, the greater your obligation to use it for good. And most of all, they taught him to hide his gifts, for now, to be patient, to grow up first as an ordinary boy, to learn who he was and what he valued before he ever showed the world what he could do. They gave him, in other words, exactly the moral foundation that his enormous power required. They made sure that before he was powerful, he was good. There is a profound truth in that, softly, worth resting on gently. Because power, by itself, is neither good nor bad. It is simply capacity, the ability to do things, to affect the world. What matters more than almost anything, is the character of the person who holds it. Give great power to a cruel person, and you get a tyrant. Give great power to a frightened or selfish person, and you get a disaster. But give great power to a genuinely good person, a person raised in love, grounded in decency, taught to value kindness and responsibility above all, and you get something wonderful. You get a protector, a guardian, a force for good in the world. And that is what those two humble farmers made out of the strange, powerful child who fell from the sky. Not a god, not a tyrant, but a good man who happened to be able to do impossible things. The powers came from the yellow sun, but the goodness came from the farm. And it is the goodness, not the powers, that makes him who he is. Let's drift, softly, into something quietly profound about him before we leave the countryside, because it is one of the most moving things in his whole story. He had, in a sense, two fathers, and the difference between them, and the way he holds both, says a great deal about who he is. There was the father who gave him life, softly, the great scientist of his dead world, who placed him in the ship and sent him away and then died with everything else. In many tellings of his story, that father did not send him off with nothing. He sent, along with the child, a way of preserving his own knowledge, his own wisdom, some recording or record of himself and of the lost world, so that one day, when the child had grown, he might learn where he came from, and hear, across all the years and all the distance, the voice of the father he never knew. Imagine that softly. Growing up, and then one day discovering a message from a father long dead, from a world long gone, reaching across the void to tell you who you are, where you came from, and what he hoped you might become. It is one of the most poignant ideas in the whole story. The dead father, speaking from beyond the grave and beyond the stars, guiding the child he could not stay to raise. And there was the other father, softly, the one who actually raised him, the humble farmer, the man who was there every day through all the long years of childhood, teaching him by quiet example how to be good. Not through grand recorded wisdom from a lost world, but through the daily, ordinary, patient work of being a good father. Showing up, working hard, being kind, living day after day the decent, honest life that the boy would absorb and make his own. This father gave him no grand cosmic heritage. He gave him something simpler and, in its way, greater. He gave him a childhood and love and values and a home. And here is the beautiful thing, softly, worth resting on gently. He honors them both. The father who gave him life and heritage, and the father who gave him love and values. He does not choose between them. He carries both, the grand cosmic legacy of his birth father and the humble earthy wisdom of the father who raised him, and he weaves them together into who he is. From one father, he takes his sense of where he came from, his heritage, his understanding of his own strange origins. From the other, he takes his goodness, his decency, his groundedness, the values that shape everything he does. Two fathers, two kinds of love, two inheritances, held together in one grateful heart. There is something in that, softly, that reaches many people deeply. Because so many people have, in their own way, more than one father, or more than one source of who they are. The people who gave them life, and the people who raised them, the heritage they were born into, and the values they were taught. And his story says, gently, that you can honor all of it, that you do not have to choose between where you came from and who raised you, between your roots and your home, between the gift of life and the gift of love. You can hold both with gratitude and let both make you whole. He does, and it is one of the quiet sources of his wholeness, his steadiness, his peace. He knows exactly who he is because he honors everyone who made him who he is. And that is a kind of wisdom worth resting on as you drift. Let's drift now, softly, out of the golden countryside and toward the next great chapter of his story. Because a boy grows up, and a young man must find his place in the world. And eventually, the time came for him to leave the quiet farm and go out into the wider world to discover what he was meant to do with his life and his gifts. And where he went was the city. A great, bright, gleaming city, one of the largest and most dazzling in the whole world. A city of towering buildings and endless bustle, of millions of people living their lives, a city that never quite slept. It was about as far from the quiet farm as you could get, and it was there, in that great city, that he would build his adult life and become the hero the world would come to know. But here, softly, we come to one of the most clever and most beloved elements of his entire story, and it is worth resting on slowly, because it is more interesting than it first appears. Because when he came to the city and began, at last, to use his powers openly to help people, he faced a problem. If everyone knew who he was, if everyone knew that the powerful flying hero was also a specific young man with a specific face and a specific life, then he would never have a moment's peace. He could never have an ordinary life, ordinary friendships, ordinary quiet. And more dangerously, anyone who wanted to hurt him or to get to him would know exactly where to find the people he cared about. And so he did something brilliant. He created two selves. There was the hero, softly, the powerful figure in the bright costume, bold and confident, who flew through the sky and performed impossible feats and saved people from danger, wrapped in a cape and a bold emblem, standing tall and sure for all the world to see. And then there was the other self, the disguise. Because to live an ordinary life, to move through the world unnoticed, he created a second identity, an ordinary man, a mild-mannered, unremarkable fellow who worked an ordinary job and lived an ordinary life, and whom no one would ever suspect of being anything special at all. He took a job as a reporter at a great newspaper in the heart of the city, which was a clever choice because it let him hear about trouble the moment it happened, and gave him a reason to be near the news. And in that identity, he was quiet, a little clumsy, a little bumbling, easy to overlook. He wore glasses. He kept his head down. He was, deliberately, the kind of person your eye slides right past. And here, softly, is the fascinating question that this dual identity raises, the question that has intrigued people for as long as his story has been told. Which one is the real him? Is the powerful hero the true self, and the ordinary man the disguise? Or is it the other way around? And the answer, for him, is genuinely interesting, and it says something deep about who he is. Because for many masked heroes, the answer is clear. The powerful figure is the truth, and the ordinary identity is the mask. But with him, many people have long felt it is more complicated, and perhaps even reversed. Because remember how he was raised. He was not raised as a powerful alien being. He was raised as an ordinary farm boy with an ordinary name by ordinary loving parents. That ordinary person, the humble, decent, down-to-earth man, is not entirely a disguise. In many ways, that is who he really feels himself to be. The mild-mannered reporter is not so far from the farm boy he actually was, and the powerful hero, in a way, is the role he puts on to do his work. He does not think of himself, deep down, as a god pretending to be a man. He thinks of himself as a man, raised on a farm by people he loved, who happens to be able to do extraordinary things, and who puts on a costume to do them. There is something quietly beautiful in that, softly, worth resting on gently, because it means that at the center of all that godlike power, there is a genuinely humble heart. He is the most powerful being on earth, and yet the self he most identifies with is not the powerful one, but the ordinary one, the decent working man, the farm boy who was taught to be kind. He does not look down on ordinary people from some great height. He is one of them, in his own heart, raised among them, sharing their values, living, when he can, an ordinary life among them. The power never went to his head, never made him feel above the people he protects, precisely because he never stopped thinking of himself as one of them. And that humility, that groundedness, that refusal to let enormous power turn him into something cold and distant and superior, is one of the most important and most gentle things about him. He could have been a god who ruled over humanity. Instead, he chose to be a man who lives among them and helps them and considers himself always simply one of them. We have come a long way already, you and I. That is worth noticing, softly, before we go on. We started on a dying world, far away among the stars, and we followed a single small ship across the dark to a quiet farm, and we watched a lost child grow up in love and become good before he ever became powerful. And we followed him to the great bright city where he built two selves, the hero and the ordinary man. If you are still here with me, drifting somewhere on the soft edge of sleep, there is no need to hold on to any of it. The details will keep. What matters is the slow, warm current of the story in the dark, and that will carry you just fine whether you remember a single thing or not. So let your grip loosen a little more, if it hasn't already. Sink a little deeper into the warm. We are about halfway along the road tonight, and the gentlest part of the journey is still ahead. Let's carry on, slowly, together. Let's drift, now, into the people who fill his life in that great city, softly, because a person is known by who they love, and his human connections are a large part of what keeps him human. And at the very center of them is one person above all, the woman he loves. Because at that great newspaper where he worked, in his ordinary identity, there was a reporter. A brilliant, fearless, sharp-witted journalist, one of the best in the city, a woman who chased down dangerous stories without a moment's fear, who was tough and clever and utterly unimpressed by anyone. And he fell in love with her, deeply and completely, almost from the start. And here, softly, is one of the gentle ironies at the heart of his story, one that has delighted people for generations. Because she, this brilliant, fearless reporter, was fascinated by the powerful hero. She admired him, chased stories about him, was drawn to the dazzling figure who flew through the sky. But the ordinary man, the mild-mannered fellow who worked at the desk near hers, the quiet, bumbling reporter, she mostly overlooked. She did not realize for the longest time that the ordinary man she saw every day and the powerful hero she admired from afar were one and the same person. And so he was in the strange position of being loved, or at least admired, in one identity, while being overlooked in the other by the very same woman who did not know they were the same man. There is something quietly poignant in that, softly, worth resting on gently, because it touches a very human longing, the longing to be loved for who you truly are, and not just for what you can do. He could have won her admiration easily as the powerful hero, but what he wanted, what anyone wants, was to be loved for himself, for the ordinary, decent person underneath, and not just for his dazzling abilities. And so his love for her carried that deeper wish, the wish to be seen and loved not as a spectacle, not as a powerful figure, but as a person, as the farm boy underneath, as the humble, decent man he truly was. It is a wish everyone understands, in their own way, the wish to be loved for who you are, and not for what you can offer. And it sat quietly at the heart of his greatest love, and she mattered to him, softly, for a reason deeper than romance. She, and the other people he came to care about in that city, his friends, his colleagues, the ordinary humans he worked beside and lived among, were the thing that kept him tethered to his own humanity. Because think of the danger he was always in, not physical danger, but a subtler danger, the danger of drifting away from ordinary human life. When you can fly above the whole world, when you are stronger than any person, when you could, if you wished, hold yourself apart from everyone and everything, it would be so easy to become distant, cold, remote, to stop feeling connected to ordinary people and their ordinary concerns, to drift up and away into loneliness, into a kind of godlike isolation, above it all and apart from it all. But his human relationships would not let him. The woman he loved, the friends he cared about, the ordinary daily life he insisted on living among them, all of it kept pulling him back down to earth, back into the warm, ordinary human world, back into connection and care and love. They kept him human. They reminded him every day that he was not a distant God, but a man among people, sharing their lives, caring about their troubles, part of the ordinary human family. And that connection, that insistence on remaining part of ordinary human life, is one of the great, quiet safeguards of his goodness. Because it is very hard to look down on people or to hold yourself above them when you love them, when you live among them, when your dearest wish is simply to be one of them, loved for who you are. His love kept him human, and his humanity kept him good. Let's drift, now, into the great enemy of his story, softly, because every hero is defined, in part, by who stands against them, and his greatest foe is one of the most fascinating in all of these tales. Because you might expect the enemy of the most powerful being on earth to be another powerful being, some monster or alien or god able to match him blow for blow. And he has faced such foes. But his true archenemy, his defining opponent, the one who matters most, is none of those things. His greatest enemy is a man, an ordinary human being with no powers at all. What that man has instead is a mind, one of the most brilliant minds on the planet, a genius of almost limitless intellect, a titan of science and business and ambition, one of the most powerful and wealthy men in the whole city, perhaps the whole world. And that man hates him with a deep and burning hatred, for reasons worth understanding, because they say something profound about the whole story. Why, softly, would a brilliant, wealthy, powerful man hate a hero who does nothing but good? The answer is one of the most psychologically interesting things in the whole legend. Part of it is simple. Before the hero arrived, this brilliant man had been, in his own mind, the greatest being in the city, perhaps in the world. The smartest, the most capable, the most important. And then, from the sky, came someone who could do things no amount of genius could match. Someone who could fly, who was invulnerable, who could do in an instant what all the brilliant man's wealth and intellect could never do. And the brilliant man could not bear it. His pride, his towering ego, could not accept that there was someone greater than himself, someone he could never match, someone who made all his genius look small. And so his wounded pride curdled into hatred. But there is a deeper layer, softly, and it is more interesting still, because the brilliant man tells himself, and perhaps even believes, that his hatred is not about pride at all, but about principle. He tells himself that the hero is dangerous, that no one should have that much power, that a being so strong, so far beyond any human check or control, is a threat to all of humanity, a potential tyrant, a god who could enslave the world on a whim. And so, in his own mind, the brilliant man is not a villain at all. He is a hero, the only one brave enough and smart enough to stand against the alien god, the champion of ordinary humanity against the overwhelming power from the stars. That is the story he tells himself, and it is a story with just enough truth in it to be seductive, because it is a fair question whether anyone should have that much power, and whether we should simply trust that they will always use it well. But here, softly, is where the brilliant man's self-deception is revealed, and where the whole conflict becomes so meaningful. Because if he genuinely feared unchecked power, he would have to look first at himself. He, with his vast wealth and his genius and his ruthless ambition, is himself a kind of unchecked power, and he uses that power for his own gain, ruthlessly, harming others without a second thought. The truth is that he does not really hate the hero for being powerful. He hates the hero for being good. Because the hero's goodness is a constant, silent rebuke to everything the brilliant man is. Here is someone with more power than the brilliant man could ever dream of, who uses it not for himself, but for others, who asks for nothing, who is humble and kind and decent. And that goodness shames the brilliant man, exposes his own selfishness, reveals the smallness of his grasping ambition. He cannot stand to exist in a world that contains someone so much better than himself. And so he must destroy him, or prove him false, or bring him down. Because as long as the good and humble hero exists, the brilliant man is reminded, every single day, of the better person he himself chose not to be. There is a profound conflict at the heart of that, softly, worth resting on gently, because it is really a conflict between two ways of being. On one side, enormous power held with humility, used for others, grounded in decency and love. On the other, enormous ability held with pride, used for oneself, grounded in ego and ambition. It is not really a fight between a strong man and a smart man. It is a fight between goodness and selfishness, between humility and pride, between a person who uses their gifts to lift others up and a person who uses their gifts to raise only themselves. And the brilliant man's tragedy is that he had it in him to be great, truly great, in the way that matters. With his genius, he could have helped the whole world. He chose, instead, to serve only himself and to hate the one who chose otherwise. He is what the hero might have become if the hero had been raised without love, without those humble farm values, and had let his gifts feed his pride instead of his compassion. The two of them are a mirror, showing the two things a gifted person can choose to become. And the whole meaning of their endless conflict is the quiet insistence that the choice matters, that what you do with your gifts is everything. Let's drift now into the one great weakness of the most powerful being on earth, softly, because it is one of the most famous things about him, and its meaning is deeper than most people realize. Because for all his strength, for all his invulnerability, there is one thing that can bring him low. And what it is beautiful and sad in equal measure. It is a piece of his dead world. When his home planet was destroyed, fragments of it were scattered across space, and some of them, over the long years, fell to Earth. And these fragments, glowing with a strange green light, are poison to him. The one substance in all the universe that can weaken him, sap his strength, cause him pain, and even, given enough time, kill him, is the shattered remains of the world where he was born. Let's sit with the poetry of that, softly, because it is genuinely moving once you think about it. The one thing that can hurt the most powerful being on earth is not some great weapon, not some mighty foe, but a piece of home. A fragment of the world he lost. The place he came from, the world of his birth, the home he can never return to, is the very thing that can destroy him. There is something so sad and so true in that, in the idea that the thing that can hurt us most deeply is so often connected to where we came from, to our origins, to our past, to home. The place that made us is also the place that can wound us most, and for him, that is literally true. The dead world reaches across all the years and all the distance, in the form of these glowing green fragments, to remind him that he can still be hurt, and that the deepest hurt comes from home. And here, softly, is a small, true thing about that weakness that is genuinely charming, a little piece of real history behind the legend. Because this famous weakness was not, at first, part of his story at all. It did not appear until years after he was created, and the reason it was invented is wonderfully ordinary. In the early years, his adventures were told not only in print, but also on the radio, performed live by actors, week after week, for a huge and devoted audience. And the man who voiced the hero, like anyone, occasionally needed a break, a vacation, some time off. But how do you give the most powerful being on earth some time off? How do you write him out of the story for a week or two? And so the writers came up with a clever solution. They invented a substance that could weaken him, that could lay him low, so that in those episodes he could be incapacitated, trapped, unable to act, and could groan and struggle quietly while other characters carried the story, requiring far less of the vacationing actor. It was, in other words, a practical solution to a very ordinary problem, an actor needing a holiday. And out of that humble practical need came one of the most famous weaknesses in all of storytelling. There is something delightful in that, softly, the way a small, ordinary need can give birth to an idea so powerful it becomes immortal. But let's return to the deeper meaning of his vulnerability, softly, because it matters enormously to who he is and why we love him. Because a hero who cannot be hurt at all is, in a strange way, hard to care about. If nothing can ever harm him, if he is never in any real danger, then his courage costs him nothing, and his victories mean less, because they were never truly in doubt. It is his vulnerability, the fact that he can be hurt, that makes his heroism real. Because it means that when he faces danger, he faces it knowing he can be hurt. When he walks toward the glowing green fragment to save someone, he does it in pain, at real risk to himself. His weakness is what makes his strength meaningful. It is what turns his power from a mere fact into a genuine act of courage. A being who risks nothing is not truly brave, but he can be hurt. He can suffer. He can even die. And he chooses to face danger anyway, again and again. And that choice, made by someone who can genuinely be harmed, is what makes him a hero, rather than just a powerful thing. There is a gentle wisdom in that, softly, worth resting on as the night deepens. That our vulnerability is not only a weakness, but in some ways the very thing that gives our courage meaning. If we could never be hurt, our bravery would be nothing. It is precisely because we can be hurt, because we have something to lose, because we are fragile in our own ways, that our choices to be brave, to be kind, to do right despite the risk, actually mean something. He, the most powerful being on earth, is beloved not in spite of his one great weakness, but in part because of it. Because it makes him one of us, a being who can be hurt, who chooses courage anyway. And that is worth far more than an invulnerability that risks nothing at all. Let's drift now into the deepest question at the very heart of his whole story, softly, the question that everything else has been circling, and it is a profound one to rest on as the night grows late. It is the question of restraint, of what he could do against what he chooses to do. Because here is the truth that sits at the center of him, the truth that makes him not just powerful, but meaningful. He could do anything, and he chooses to do good. Think softly about just how much power he really has. He is strong enough to move mountains, fast enough to outrace light, invulnerable to almost all harm, able to fly anywhere in the world in moments. There is almost nothing he could not do if he chose to. He could take over any country he wished. He could seize any treasure, topple any government, force the whole world to bow to his will. No army could stop him. No weapon could hold him. No power on earth could resist him if he decided to simply take control. He is, in the most literal sense, the single most powerful being on the planet, capable of imposing his will on all of humanity, and there would be very little anyone could do about it. And he chooses, instead, softly, to help an old woman across the street, to catch a falling child, to pull people from a burning building, to stop a robbery, to save a sinking ship, to be, day after day, a humble servant of the very people he could so easily rule. That is the astonishing thing about him, the thing that is so easy to take for granted and so important to truly see. He has the power of a god, and he uses it like a good neighbor. He could rule the world, and instead he protects it, asking nothing in return, expecting no reward, seeking no power, wanting only to help. The gap between what he could do and what he chooses to do is almost unimaginably vast. And in that gap, in that restraint, in that daily choice to use overwhelming power only ever in the service of others, lies everything that makes him who he is. There is an old idea, softly, worth resting on gently, that the truest test of a person's character is what they do with power, and especially what they refrain from doing. It is easy to be good when you are weak, when you have no choice, when you could not do harm even if you wanted to. But to be good when you could do anything, when nothing could stop you, when every temptation of power is available to you and no one could hold you accountable, that is the real test. That is where character is truly revealed. And he passes that test every single day in the most complete way imaginable. Given the power to do literally anything, he chooses over and over to do good and only good. It is not that he is incapable of harm. He is more capable of harm than anyone who has ever lived. It is that he chooses, freely, constantly, never to do it. And a good choice made freely, by someone who could easily choose otherwise, is worth infinitely more than goodness that comes from having no other option. And this, softly, is why his story is ultimately so hopeful and such a gentle thing to drift toward sleep on. Because he is, in a way, an argument that goodness is a choice, and that it is possible, even for someone with unlimited power, to choose it. We live in a world where we often see power corrupt, where we often see those who can do what they want doing terrible things, where we half expect that anyone given unlimited power would eventually misuse it. And into that cynicism, his story offers a quiet, stubborn hope. It says, no, it does not have to be that way. It is possible to have all the power in the world and remain good. It is possible to be able to do anything and to choose freely to do only good. He is the proof, the dream, the aspiration, the most powerful being imaginable, who is also the kindest. And in holding up that image again and again, his story insists, gently, that power and goodness are not enemies, that strength and kindness can live in the same heart, that it is possible to be mighty and humble at once. That is a beautiful thing to believe, and he exists, in large part, to help us believe it. Let's rest here a moment, softly, in the warmth of that idea, because it is one of the most comforting things there is. The image of overwhelming power held entirely in the service of gentleness, of the strongest being alive choosing, always, to protect rather than to rule, to lift up rather than to dominate, to serve rather than to be served. There is something deeply reassuring in that image, something that soothes an old human fear. The fear that power always corrupts, that might always makes right, that the strong will always trample the weak. He is the answer to that fear, the gentle, stubborn insistence that it does not have to be so. And to rest on that, as you drift towards sleep, is to rest on one of the most hopeful ideas humanity has ever dreamed up, that the mightiest of all could also be the kindest, that power in the right heart becomes protection. That is the dream at the center of him, and it is a good dream to carry down into sleep. Let's drift, softly, into the single most famous thing he can do, before we come to his deeper themes, because it is beautiful to rest on, and it means more than it seems. Of all his powers, the one that everyone pictures first, the one that defines him, is flight. The ability to leave the ground entirely, to rise up into the open sky, to soar above the whole world, free of the earth, free of gravity, free of everything that holds the rest of us down. There is a reason, softly, that flight became his signature, the power we associate with him above all others. Because flight is one of the oldest dreams humanity has. For as long as there have been people, we have looked up at the birds, at the clouds, at the open sky, and longed to rise into it, to be free of the ground, to slip the bonds of the earth and soar. It is one of our deepest and most universal dreams, the dream of flying, and almost everyone has felt it, has dreamed at night of rising into the air, has watched something fly and wished, quietly, that they could too. And he embodies that dream completely. When he rises into the sky, he is doing the thing that all of us, somewhere deep down, have always wanted to do. And there is something in his flight, softly, worth resting on gently, that goes beyond the simple thrill of it. Because flight, in his story, is tied to freedom, and to aspiration, and to the lifting of the spirit. When he flies, he rises above the troubles of the world, above the noise and the weight and the struggle, into the clear, open air. And there is something in that image that lifts our own spirits just to see it. It reminds us that it is possible to rise, that we are not always and only bound to the ground, to our troubles, to the weight of our lives. That there is, somewhere, the possibility of rising above it all, into something freer and clearer and higher. His flight is a picture of hope in motion, of the spirit lifting, of the possibility of transcending the things that hold us down. And to watch him rise into the sky is to feel, for a moment, our own spirits lift with him. And notice, softly, one last gentle thing about his flight. He always comes back down. He rises into the free, open sky above the whole world, and he could, if he wished, simply stay up there, aloof and distant and free. But he always descends, always returns to the ground, to the people, to the work of helping. His flight is never an escape. It is never a way of leaving the world behind. It is only ever a way of moving through it, of reaching those who need him faster, of watching over the world he loves. He rises, and he returns. He touches the freedom of the open sky, and then he comes back down to the warm human world he has chosen to serve. And there is something beautiful in that, to rest on as you drift. The one who could fly away from everything, and who always, always comes back. Rising, only to return. Free, and yet choosing, always, to come home. Let's drift now into one of the deepest and most beautiful themes woven through his whole story, softly, one that has meant a great deal to a great many people. It is the theme of belonging to two worlds and fully to neither. Because think about his strange situation. He was born on one world and raised on another. He carries the blood and the heritage of a place he never knew, a dead world he cannot remember, and yet he was shaped entirely by a different world, the one he was raised on, the one he calls home. He is, in the truest sense, a child of two worlds. And that gives him a particular kind of experience that resonates with millions of people. The experience of the immigrant, of the one who comes from somewhere else, of belonging to two places and sometimes feeling fully at home in neither. This is worth resting on gently, softly, because it is woven very deep into who he is, right down to his very origins. The two young men who first dreamed him up, all those years ago, were themselves the children of immigrants, families who had come from far away to build a new life in a new land. And whether they intended it or not, they poured that experience into him. The child sent away from a doomed old world to grow up in a new one, the one who must build a life among people not his own, who must find a way to belong somewhere that is not where he came from. His very name, in the language of his birth world, carries echoes of ancient words and ancient stories, and his origin, the child set adrift to escape destruction and raised by strangers who become family, echoes some of the oldest and most sacred stories humanity has told. Stories of exile and rescue, of a child saved from catastrophe to grow into a deliverer. He is, at his root, an immigrant story, a refugee story, the story of the one who came from elsewhere and made a home and gave everything to the new world that took him in. And there is something profoundly moving in the way he resolves that experience, softly, worth resting on gently. Because being caught between two worlds can be painful. It can leave a person feeling rootless, belonging nowhere, torn between a heritage they barely know and a home where they still feel, sometimes, like an outsider. But he does not let it break him, or embitter him, or leave him lost. Instead, he takes the best of both worlds and makes something whole. He honors the world he came from, keeps its memory, carries its heritage with quiet pride, and he gives himself completely to the world that raised him, loving it, protecting it, becoming its greatest champion. He does not choose one world over the other. He belongs to both, and he lets both make him who he is. The heritage of his birth world and the values of his adopted home come together in him, not in conflict, but in harmony, each making him richer, each part of the whole person he became. There is a beautiful lesson in that, softly, for anyone who has ever felt caught between worlds, between cultures, between where they came from and where they are. His story says that you do not have to choose, that you can honor your origins and embrace your new home at once, that being a child of two worlds is not a curse, but a gift, a doubling, a richness, a way of belonging more widely rather than less. He is proof that the immigrant experience, the experience of coming from elsewhere and making a home, can produce not a broken and divided person, but a whole and generous one, someone who carries two heritages and gives back to both, someone whose very betweenness becomes a source of strength and compassion. He came from a dead world and made a home on a living one, and he became, out of that doubled belonging, the greatest protector the new world ever had. There is deep comfort in that, and deep hope for everyone who has ever wondered where, exactly, they belong. And there is one more thing in his two-world nature worth resting on, softly, as the night deepens, because his love for his adopted world is, in a way, all the more moving because it was chosen. He did not have to love the world that raised him. He could have resented it, could have held himself apart, could have longed only for the dead world he lost and scorned the new one. But he did not. He chose to love the new world, to give himself to it, to protect it with everything he had. And love that is chosen, love given freely by someone who had every reason to withhold it, is the deepest love there is. He lost one world, and instead of closing his heart, he opened it wider and gave all his love to another. That is a kind of grace, the grace of the one who suffers loss and responds not with bitterness, but with even greater love. And it sits, quiet and warm, at the very center of who he is. Let's drift now into the symbol he wears, softly, because it has come to mean something far larger than itself, and its meaning is a gentle and beautiful thing to rest on. Because on his chest, on the bright costume, he wears an emblem, a simple shape, a single stylized letter within a shield, bold and clear and instantly recognizable. It is one of the most famous symbols in the entire world, known to billions of people, recognized in every country on Earth. And what it has come to stand for is worth understanding. In the beginning, softly, the symbol was simple. It was just the first letter of his heroic name, a way of marking his costume, nothing more. But over the long years, as his story deepened and grew, the symbol took on a richer meaning. It was reimagined as something older and grander, a crest, the symbol of his family, his house, the noble line he descended from on his dead birth world. It became a piece of his lost heritage, worn proudly on his chest, a way of carrying his origins with him, always. And more than that, in the language of his birth world, the symbol came to be understood as standing for a single, powerful idea: hope. The symbol he wears, the emblem known across the whole world, came to mean, in the tongue of his lost people, hope itself. Let's rest on the beauty of that, softly, because it is exactly right, and it captures everything he is. Because that is what he represents, in the end, to the people of the world he protects. Not just strength, not just power, but hope. When people see him in the sky, when they see that symbol, what they feel is not fear, but relief. Not dread, but comfort. It means that help is coming. It means that someone is watching over them. It means that no matter how dark things seem, there is a force of pure good in the world, standing between the innocent and the things that would harm them. The symbol on his chest is a promise, written in the sky, that says to everyone who sees it, hold on. You are not alone. Someone is coming to help. There is still hope. And there is something profound, softly, in the idea that a person can become a symbol of hope, worth resting on gently. Because hope is one of the most precious things a human being can have. In dark times, in frightening times, in times of loss and fear and struggle, hope is sometimes the only thing that keeps a person going. The belief that things can get better, that help is possible, that the darkness is not the whole story. And a symbol of hope, something a frightened person can look toward and take comfort from, is an enormously powerful thing. It does not, by itself, solve every problem, but it gives people the strength to keep going, to hold on, to endure. And he became that for the whole world. A symbol in the sky that says, to everyone who looks up, do not give up. There is still good in the world. There is still hope. There is a reason, softly, that he endures, that he has lasted all these decades, that he remains beloved after so long, when so many other stories have faded. And it is this: he represents the best of what we hope to be. He is what we would want to be if we had his power. He is the dream of goodness triumphant, of strength used only for kindness, of power held with humility, of hope made solid and bright and visible in the sky. He is an ideal, not a realistic character in some ways, not a flawed and complicated anti-hero, but something rarer and, in its own way, more necessary. A picture of pure goodness, a vision of the best that a person can be. And we need such visions. We need something to aspire to, something to look up to, something that reminds us of the good we are capable of. He gives us that. He holds up, again and again, across all the decades, the simple, radiant image of a genuinely good person with the power to make their goodness matter. And that image, that ideal, that beacon of hope, is why he will never really fade. Because as long as people need hope, as long as people need something good to look up to, they will need him, or something like him, the first hero, the kindest one, the symbol of hope shining in the sky. Let's rest here a while, softly, in the glow of that, because it is a beautiful place to be as sleep draws near. The bright symbol against the sky, the promise of help, the hope made visible, the reminder, written in bold and simple lines, that goodness is real, that help is coming, that no one has to face the darkness alone. Let that hope settle over you now, softly, as you drift. The knowledge that somewhere, in the great story he represents, there is always a force of pure good watching over the innocent, always a symbol of hope shining against the dark. It is only a story, but it points at something real, at the goodness that truly does exist in the world, at the help that truly does come, at the hope that is always, somewhere, worth holding on to. Rest in that. Let it hold you, gently, as you sink towards sleep. Let's drift now into a gentle misunderstanding about him, softly, one worth clearing away, because it reveals something deep about the nature of goodness itself. Because some people, over the years, have found him a little boring. They say he is too good, too perfect, too wholesome, that his unwavering decency makes him less interesting than the darker, more troubled, more flawed heroes who came after him. And it is worth resting on that criticism, gently, because understanding why it misses the mark tells us something true and important. Because here is the thing, softly. His goodness is not boring, and it is not easy, and it is not simple. It only looks that way from the outside. In truth, his goodness is a constant, difficult, deliberate choice, made fresh every single day, against every reason not to. Think about what he sees. He can hear, with his incredible senses, all the suffering in the world at once. Every cry for help, every act of cruelty, every injustice. He knows, better than anyone, how dark the world can be, how much pain there is, how many people do harm. He could so easily become cynical. He could so easily conclude that people are not worth saving, that the world is too broken to protect, that his efforts are pointless against so much darkness. He has every reason to give up on humanity, more reason than any of us, because he sees more of the darkness than any of us ever will. And he chooses anyway, softly, to believe in people, to keep hoping, to keep helping, to see, past all the darkness, the good that is also there, and to fight for it. His optimism, his faith in humanity, his stubborn insistence on kindness, is not the naive simplicity of someone who does not know how bad things can be. It is the hard-won choice of someone who knows exactly how bad things can be, who sees the worst of it every day, and who chooses hope anyway. And that is not boring. That is one of the bravest and most difficult things a person can do, to know the full weight of the world's darkness, and to choose, still, to believe in its light, to be hurt by the world again and again, and to keep loving it anyway. That is not weakness or simplicity. That is a strength greater than any of his physical powers. There is a deep truth in that, softly, worth resting on gently. Because real goodness, the genuine article, is not the absence of any knowledge of darkness. It is not innocence or naivety or simply never having been hurt. Real goodness is what happens when someone who knows all about the darkness chooses the light anyway. Anyone can be kind when they have never been hurt. Anyone can be hopeful when they have never seen despair. The real test, the real achievement, is to be kind after you have been hurt, to be hopeful after you have seen despair, to keep believing in people after they have given you every reason not to. That is his goodness. Not the easy goodness of someone who does not know any better, but the hard, chosen, courageous goodness of someone who knows exactly how dark things can be and refuses, stubbornly, lovingly, to give in to that darkness. And there is nothing boring about that. It is, in fact, the most inspiring thing there is. And this points why his particular kind of heroism, softly, is so quietly important and such a gentle thing to rest on. Because it would be easy, seeing the darkness of the world, to respond with more darkness, to meet cruelty with cruelty, cynicism with cynicism, hardness with hardness. That is the common way, the easy way, the way that feels justified. But he shows another way. He meets the darkness with light. He answers cruelty with kindness, cynicism with hope, hardness with gentleness. He refuses to let the darkness of the world make him dark. He refuses to become what he fights. And in that refusal, in that stubborn choice to remain good and gentle and hopeful in the face of everything, he offers a kind of quiet heroism that anyone can practice, in their own life, at their own scale. The heroism of remaining kind in an unkind world. The heroism of keeping your hope alive when everything conspires to crush it. The heroism of choosing every day to be good, not because it is easy, but because it is right, and because someone has to, and because the alternative is to let the darkness win. That is his real power. Not the strength, not the flight, not the invulnerability. The power to remain good. And it is a power available, in its own way, to every single one of us. Let's drift now into the quieter, lonelier side of him, softly, because for all his brightness, for all his hope, there is a solitude at the center of him that is worth resting on gently, and it is a tender thing to sit with as the night grows deep. Because he is, remember, the last of his kind. And no matter how loved he is, no matter how many friends he has, no matter how deeply he belongs to his adopted world, there is a loneliness in that which no one else can quite share. Think about it, softly. There is no one else like him. No one who remembers the world he came from, because he barely remembers it himself, and everyone who did is gone. No one who shares his heritage, his origins, the strange particular experience of being the sole survivor of a vanished people. He can have friends and love and family, and he does, and they mean everything to him. But there is a room in his heart that none of them can enter, a solitude that comes from being truly, cosmically alone in a way no one else can be. He is surrounded by billions of people and beloved by many, and yet he is also, in the deepest sense, the only one of his kind who exists. And that is a particular and profound kind of loneliness. And so, softly, in many tellings of his story, he keeps a private place, a refuge, far from everyone, in some remote and secret corner of the world, a place of ice and silence where he can go to be alone. A fortress of solitude, it is sometimes called, and the name is perfect, because it is a place built for exactly that, for solitude, for retreat, for the quiet a person needs when the weight of the world grows heavy. And in that private place, he keeps the memories of his dead world, the fragments of his lost heritage, the records and images of the people and the place he came from. It is a place where he can go to remember who he is, where he comes from, what he lost. A place where he can simply be himself, the last of his kind, alone with the memory of everything that was taken from him before he ever knew it. There is something deeply human in that, softly, worth resting on gently, even though he is not human at all. Because everyone needs a place like that, a place of retreat, of solitude, of quiet. A place to go when the world grows heavy, when the noise becomes too much, when you need simply to be alone with yourself and your memories and your grief. We do not all have a fortress of ice at the top of the world, but we all need some version of it, some quiet, private place, real or internal, where we can retreat and rest and remember and simply be, away from all the demands and all the noise. He, the most powerful being on earth, needs that just as much as anyone, perhaps more, because he carries more. And there is something comforting in knowing that even he, even the mightiest and brightest of them all, needs his moments of solitude, his quiet retreats, his time alone with his own heart. And there is a gentle beauty, softly, in how he holds his loneliness, because he does not let it embitter him, or harden him, or turn him inward and cold. He feels it, the solitude of being the last of his kind, and he carries it, quietly, and then he returns, again and again, to the warm world of people who love him, and he gives himself back to them, and to the work of protecting them. His loneliness does not close his heart, it deepens it. It gives him a tenderness, a compassion, an understanding of loss and isolation that makes him gentler with others, kinder to the lonely and the lost, more able to reach the people who feel, as he feels, alone. He knows what it is to be the only one, to belong nowhere fully, to carry a grief that no one else can share. And rather than letting that make him hard, he lets it make him kind. He turns his own loneliness into compassion for the lonely. And that, softly, is one of the most beautiful things a person can do with their pain. To let it soften them rather than harden them. To turn their own suffering into gentleness toward others. He does that. The loneliest being on earth becomes, because of his loneliness, the kindest. And there is deep grace in that, to rest on as you drift toward sleep. Let's drift, softly, into one last thought about him before we gather the story together, because it is worth resting on, and it is a gentle and hopeful thing to hold as sleep draws near. It is the simple fact of how long he has lasted, and why. Because he has been with us now for the better part of a century. He was dreamed up in a difficult, frightening time, in the years before a great war, when the world felt dark and uncertain, and people were afraid. And he has remained, through all the decades since, through every hardship and every change, beloved, enduring, still shining. Generation after generation has discovered him, taken him into their hearts, and passed him on to the next. He is older than almost anyone alive, and yet he has never grown old. Why, softly? Why has he lasted so long when so many things fade? The answer, I think, is the same answer as everything else about him, because what he represents does not go out of fashion. Trends change, styles change, the world changes again and again. But the longing for goodness does not change. The need for hope does not change. The dream of a protector, a guardian, someone strong and kind who watches over us and means us well, does not change. These are permanent human needs, as old as humanity and as new as every child born. And because he speaks to those permanent needs, because he embodies those timeless longings, He never really dates, never really fades, never really grows old. Every new generation, facing its own darkness, its own fears, its own uncertain times, looks up and finds that they need him just as much as the generation before did. And so, he endures. There is something deeply comforting in that, softly, worth resting on gently. The endurance of him, the way he keeps returning, keeps being rediscovered, keeps shining across all the long decades. Because it means something, that a figure of pure goodness, pure hope, pure kindness has lasted so long and remained so loved. It means that people, whatever else is true of us, keep needing goodness, keep reaching for hope, keep wanting to believe in a protector who is strong and kind. It means that the longing for the good is permanent in us, unkillable, always there. And in a world that can sometimes feel cynical, that can sometimes make you wonder whether anyone believes in goodness anymore, there is real comfort in that. The fact that this bright, hopeful, kind figure has endured for the better part of a century and is still beloved is quiet proof that the hunger for goodness never dies, that people still want to believe, that hope is still, always, something we reach for. And there is no more soothing thing to rest on as you drift towards sleep than that. Let's begin, now, softly, to draw the threads of this long story together as the night grows deep and sleep draws very near. Because we have traveled a long way tonight, all the way from a dying world among the distant stars to this quiet moment at the edge of sleep, and it is worth gathering it up, gently, one last time. We began on a doomed world, with a father who could not save his planet and so saved his child, placing a single baby in a single small ship and sending him away into the dark. We followed that ship across the vast distance to a quiet farm where two humble, loving people found the child and raised him as their own, and taught him, before he was ever powerful, to be good. We watched his strange gifts grow under the warm yellow sun, and we saw how the goodness of his upbringing shaped what he did with them. We followed him to the great, bright city, where he built two selves, the powerful hero and the humble, ordinary man, and we saw that the ordinary man, the decent, farm-raised soul, was the truest self of all. We met the woman he loved, and the human connections that kept him tethered to his own humanity. We looked into the eyes of his great enemy and saw there the mirror of pride against humility, of what a gifted person can choose to become. We rested on his one great weakness, the peace of his dead world, and saw how his vulnerability makes his courage real. We sat with the deepest question of all, what he could do against what he chooses to do, and found in his restraint the whole meaning of him. We drifted through his two-world heritage, his loneliness, his stubborn, hard-won hope, and the bright symbol on his chest that came to mean, to the whole world, exactly that: hope. And underneath all of it, softly, one simple, radiant truth: that here was a being who could have done anything, who could have ruled the world, who had more power than anyone who ever lived, and who chose, freely, constantly, humbly, simply, to be good, to protect rather than to rule, to serve rather than to be served, to answer the darkness of the world not with more darkness, but with light. That is who he is, not the power, the choice, the daily, quiet, unglamorous, endlessly repeated choice to use everything he has in the service of kindness. He is the dream of goodness made mighty, the hope that power and gentleness can live in the same heart, the first and the kindest of all the heroes. And that is a beautiful thing to have drifted through, and a beautiful thing to carry down with you now into sleep. So let the whole story go now, softly, and let yourself drift the rest of the way down into sleep. The great bright city is quiet beneath its glowing lights. all its people safe in their beds, watched over through the long night. High above, somewhere in the dark sky, or perhaps far away in a fortress of silence and ice, the last son of a dead world keeps his quiet, gentle watch over the sleeping world he chose to love. He asks for nothing. He expects no reward. He simply watches and protects and hopes, exactly as he always has, exactly as he always will. The symbol of hope shines somewhere in the dark. The world sleeps, safe and warm, beneath the watch of the kindest of all its guardians. And you are safe too, here in the quiet, wrapped in the dark, with nothing at all to do now but rest. No one needs saving tonight, least of all you. You are allowed to let go. Sleep well, dreamer. The city lights are still glowing softly far below. The symbol of hope is still shining somewhere against the dark. The watch is still being kept, gently, by the last son of a lost world who chose, out of everything, to be kind. The story will keep unspooling, quietly, whether you are awake to follow it or not. And that is exactly as it should be. And whenever you are ready, on whatever quiet night you find your way back here, we will drift through another story together, softly, in the dark. There is no hurry at all. There never is. Rest now. You are safe. Sleep well.